Okay, Chaverim, welcome everyone. I have a couple of preludes before we jump in and get started. First, we are at Parshat Vezot HaBracha, and that means we are at the last Parsha in the Torah. It also means that beginning next week, we will be segueing to something different. No. I had received several requests for doing a different topic thing. So we need to sort of choose a different topic thing. One suggestion that was put forth was to look at the Book of Psalms. Always a fun endeavor. Another suggestion that was put forth was to just sort of do sort of a more topical approach. But if we are going to do that, I would prefer help, or not prefer, yes, I would prefer help in choosing the topics so that they are subject areas that you are interested in, not just ones that I'm curious about. So, I mean, before we start with Vezot HaBracha, any preference of those two models? Silenced a room of Jews. How do you like them apples?
Well, I said Psalms. Okay. And the other thing I would think of would be ratings. But I like Psalms. There's only 150 of them. So.
Mark.
I prefer that we stay studying Torah.
Well,
most of us have a lot to learn, and I say stick with what we got.
Well, since several people have requested something else, and I would suggest that Torah is a very, very broad term, which encompasses any Jewish learning. I guarantee you that Torah will not be lost on us.
Well, okay. I meant studying the Torah.
No, I understand what you meant, but I would echo that the study of other aspects of our literature are no less the study of Torah.
So what do you think? Topical seems to be too we can go any place with the Torah. I mean, it doesn't seem like it's focused.
Well, we had one time with ethics. When we had one with the ethics, we did that, and then the other one was when the rabbi picked a book, and therefore we would take this particular aspect of a topic or whatever.
Well, I don't know that I want to reprise stuff that you've necessarily done before.
Well, I was just giving him a little history, that's all. Which I'm sure you knew anyway.
Psalms would be interesting as it relates to history of the time. You know.
Some are in many ways a little ahistorical, because they're often very, very hard to specifically identify as, oh, this was written in 628 BCE in response to such and such an event.
Okay, well.
Oh, Pirkei is always a fun study.
Something like that.
Okay.
I like that too.
You like that too?
Yeah.
Okay, so
that's fine with me.
So Pirkei Avot it is. I will see if we have a little stash of similar translations, or enough copies to share, and enough copies to share with people who are joining us virtually so that they have a text in front of them.
Is there paperback versions of that?
There are many translations of Pirkei Avot.
Okay.
We could
Look, the
use
beauty of short books is that people are quicker to translate them.
Okay.
We could use sort of,
Yes, the Siddur has them. But I was trying to see, I want to see if I can find something with some commentary to it for people to have.
And you could print out and put it online.
I could.
It's copyrighted.
Well, if we're doing limited amounts and in an educational setting, there is a copyright exemption that allows for such. But I also don't mind doing it online as opposed to killing many trees. Because I'd rather just buy another copy of a book.
Well, that way they'd have it.
If we're going to do it, would you please put out a little snippet as to what you're going to do so that other people know that you're going to do per cap vote as opposed to just the
Yes,
rabbis.
yes, we're gonna have,
we're
gonna have to change the advertising.
Yes,
And
that's what I'm suggesting.
perhaps maybe even get a commercial for it on Yom Kippur.
All right,
Rabbi,
not that the announcements are long enough on.
No, I wouldn't do it as part of the announcements.
Rabbi,
Would not do it as part of the announcements.
Rabbi, did anyone online other than Mark have?
No, I saw no other hands.
Oh, where's Rhoda? Because Rhoda would like to have input, I'm sure.
You snooze, you lose.
Okay, so
Okay, so let's jump Parshat V'zot HaBracha. And Parshat V'zot HaBracha literally means, and this is the blessing, right? It is generally described, at least chapter 33, which represents sort of Moshe's last words to the people, as a poem. It's, I would call it sort of poetic in style and in some rhythms rather than in than a more formal sense, depending on the way it's laid out in your books. It may look more like poetry than prose, but in the Torah itself, unlike last week's Torah portion, which is very much set up as a poem, Bezot HaBracha is set up as a prose text. Okay. Also, it's very much, it's got a biblical poetry vibe. Most of the phrases are parallel colons of mostly equal stress units. So that gives it its poetic sense. There's a lot of parallel terms in the first part and the second part. And like I mentioned last time, there was sort of a cadre of traditional pairings, and we see them used here. There's a lot of animal imagery and wordplay, but the chapter also contains a lot of very unique words, and in some cases, rare words. By that I mean words that are used here and nowhere else in the Torah, nowhere else in the Tanakh. The challenge with rare words like that is sometimes you understand them only from context. And sometimes you don't even understand them then because it's not entirely clear what the word exactly means. There's also a recognition that the biblical Hebrew here, because it's one of the most ancient strata of biblical literature, the literature evolves over time. The language evolves a little bit over time. So, for example, you get certain verb structures that fall out of use in favor of new ones. And sometimes as the evolution is happening, certain words get a little messed up. Right? Those are called, sometimes they're called scribal errors. Sometimes they're just kind of little mistakes. Let me highlight one for you. In verse 4, it says, Torah tziva lanu Moshe morasha kihilat Yaakov. The problem is the word Moshe makes the sentence very awkward and difficult to understand, and sometimes you get some very bizarre translations. But if you take out the word Moshe, it flows very, very nicely. Now, the word Moshe and the word Morasha are very, very similar words, right? Moshe, Morasha, right? The only difference is the letter Resh. So there are any number of modern biblical scholars who say that somewhere along the line, Torah tziva lanu morasha, morasha kihilat Yaakov, Torah was commanded to us, or we were charged with Torah. It was given to us as an inheritance. Right? See the parallelism? You don't need Moshe in there. In fact, adding Moshe in there complicates the sentence. But you could see where Morasha can lead to a Moshe being added, because Moshe Morasha got a little sound-alike quality. And as I suggested on Rosh Hashanah, that which is presented orally often triggers misheard words. Okay. Right? Some modern biblical scholars have suggested that the tone of this is evocative in some ways of the book of Psalms, and suggests that this passage may in fact have originally had a liturgical context, whether it was recited when the Israelites came to celebrate pilgrimage festivals, or whether it was recited when the tribes all gathered together once every 7 years for a collective Jewish moment. There are suggestions that it may have been part of the celebrations at Shiloh or Shechem, or in one of the other sanctuary places that existed before the consolidation of worship in Jerusalem. The poem that represents Moshe's blessing has very little in common with the rest of the book of Deuteronomy in terms of style, phrases, or themes. So, that's you.
Oh, I've got to take this one.
Okay.
Apologize.
Unlike the book of Devarim, which has certain formulas that recur and certain themes, especially when it comes to reiterating history as a paradigm for what's going to happen, right? That's absent. There's nothing about God's promise to the patriarchs, which is a recurrent theme in the book of Deuteronomy. There's nothing about the Exodus from Egypt, which is a recurring theme in the book of Deuteronomy. There's nothing about what happens at Sinai and God's revelation. There's nothing about Israel's covenant with God or its chosenness on the part of God. Right? One of the concerns of the book of Deuteronomy is about idolatry and falling away from a monotheistic belief in God. Makes no appearance in Moshe's prayer. And there's nothing in Moshe's prayer that suggests that the Israelites need to behave themselves in order to enjoy God's blessing, which is a theme that runs from the beginning all the way through the book of Deuteronomy. So all of that suggests to many modern scholars, besides a few other things such as the description of Moshe as the man of God, doesn't appear anywhere else in Deuteronomy. The suggestion is that this predates the creation of the book of Deuteronomy, right? But you have to put it at the end of the book of Deuteronomy because this is Moshe's final word before he goes up the mountain and dies, which means you can't put it before the book of Deuteronomy because he's alive, right? And if in fact those scholars are correct, what we read as chapters 33 and 34 of the book of Deuteronomy may in fact originally been the end of the book of Numbers. And then the book of Deuteronomy was kind of shoved in after the covenant moment and the appointment of Joshua, and just before the death of Moses.
It's very Moshe centric too, isn't it? I mean, this is all. I mean, I'm not going to say it's all about Moses, but
What's all about Moses?
The blessing, the Habakkuk. I mean, everything is. It was certainly seen from his. I don't know. It just seemed like it was very personal. Maybe it's because
it is very personal. I'm just gonna squeeze through here and let Beverly back in. It is very personal, but we don't really hear much about Moses as much as Moses wants to convey, wish, pray for the Israelites whom he's led for over 40 years.
So it's a lot of Moses speaking then.
Yes, this is all Moses speaking, but the same could be said for the book of Deuteronomy, whereas in the rest of Deuteronomy you get Moshe saying, I told you to do this and you did the other thing. I did this and you didn't listen. There's a lot more Moshe in the foreground as opposed to Moshe the speaker talking about. That doesn't appear in the book of Deuteronomy very much.
No, I'm saying the difference between the earlier books where Moses is.
Yeah, Moses is the conduit, whereas he is the author, if you will.
Paragraph 1.
Okay, so we'll get to that in 1 second, I promise. Okay. Okay, actually, let's stop with that as prelude. All right, and those of you who are joining us virtually may not appreciate that everybody here is looking at a different translation of our text. Right? Some of you have heard me talk before about one of my teachers, Rabbi Yochanan Mufs of blessed memory, and the way things function. He was a professor of Bible at the seminary, and the way his class worked. We met in his office, which meant that things were a little cramped and cozy. But you sat in his class with translations of every kind whatsoever, based on whatever languages you had a skill set in. So everybody would have at least an English translation, but not generally the same one. Plus you would have, if you spoke French, you had a French translation in front of you. If you spoke Spanish, you had a Spanish translation. If you could read ancient Greek, you had the Septuagint in front of you. If you had skills in Latin, you had the Vulgate in front of you. With the idea being that part of the reality of translation is somewhat interpretive. Any translator that does not own up or and freely admit that they are engaging in interpretation and not just translation is being a little disingenuous, because there are words that may be translated by a variety of different words, in part because they don't always have an obvious or easy equivalent in the language to which you are going. Okay? Plus, as I noted earlier, there's some language here that is difficult, unclear, and as such, demands decisions as to how am I going to translate it? What choices am I making in the words that I'm choosing? Right? And around the table, you have a variety of translations. You, I believe, are holding the Cincino translation, right? Relatively early 20th century translation, as is the old JPS translation that Bobby Sue has, old JPS 1917, right? Those of you who are using the Eitz Chaim, you have the new JPS translation. New being a relative term, only because it's new relative to the 1917 one, but it was done in the 60s. Right, so not so new anymore, right? Sam, I think you're holding the art scroll.
Yes.
And you are, Arnie, I think I gave you the Hertz. Yep, all right. Created a little bit later than the Cincino one, if my memory serves me correctly, and the Hertz translation was the one that many of us know from Shul, because that was the popular Chumash before the Burgundy volume that we have from that's got the new JPS translation. And Lewis in front of you is is probably the newest of all of them. It was done by a scholar named Everett Fox, and Fox's uniqueness is in some ways his desire to capture some of the poetic elements of the Hebrew, not necessarily in the same sound, but by creating alliteration. So, for example, in Fox's translation of the book of Jonah, the Hebrew says, with regard to the boat that Jonah and the sailors are on in the middle of the storm, it says, Chashva lehishaver. So you got that sh sound, that right? And when he he translates it as the boat was on the brink of breaking. All right. So you got the B sound, and then you got the brink of breaking. Chashva lehishaver. You know, when in Genesis, when it talks about Ba'aretz Haita, and the earth was tohu vavohu, right? You see, you feel the alliteration, tohu vavohu. Well, he's not going to capture that exactly, but he describes it translates it as the world was wild and waste. Okay?
I have a question.
which is just for, all right. And were you more used, you were most likely more familiar with the world was void and empty, wild and waste, have a very different feel than void or empty or something like that. So his desire to alliterate also affects his word choice, which also affects how we understand the one, void connotes emptiness, whereas wild implies that there's something there, but it's a jumble, it's a mess. All right. So just right there, you can see how the words you choose to translate words affect radically how you understand it. Okay, Arnie, you had a question, comment?
Okay. Okay, well, let me say it after the thing is over, because I want to get to this.
Okay. All right, so with all of the translations around the table, I'm going to read the JPS one, because that's what my big book has. But if your translation has something that is, to your mind, consequentially different, wave a hand and let us know, and we'll pause and we'll explore it. So chapter 33, verse 1. This is the blessing with which Moses, the man of God, bade the Israelites farewell before he died. He said, "The Lord came from Sinai. He shone upon them from Seir. He appeared from Mount Paran and approached from Rivavot Kodesh, lightning flashing at them from his right. Lover indeed of the people, their hallowed are all in your hand." Okay.
Mine's very different.
Yours is very different. I sort of assumed that we would discover that. So what have you got?
The Lord came from Sinai and rose from Seir unto them.
Okay, rose,
He
okay.
shined forth from Mount Paran, and he came from the myriads holy. At his right hand was a fiery law unto them.
Okay. That's okay. So Hertz and Cincino are probably quite similar, right? But just right there, you see how different, all right? Right? The Hebrew is bizarrach. Zarach has usually means shine. And part of what is evoked is the idea of God surrounded by a brilliant radiance, right? Which was a common ancient Near Eastern motif when dealing with the deities, right? The psalmist uses, one of the prophets says, "Ote or kasalma," that God wraps himself in light like a garment. In fact, it's a verse that some people say before putting on a talit. The idea that just as we wrap ourselves and envelop ourselves in the talit, God envelops himself in light.
It's one of the few metaphors that's universal, is light versus dark.
Yes. All right. In the next, the word Hophia says he appeared from Mount Paran. In mine, yours was he came from Mount Paran.
No, it's he shined forth.
He shined forth. All right. The problem is Hophia doesn't usually mean shine. Right? It can sometimes, but I think the translator is going, these are poetic parallels, and therefore Hophia has to mean the same as Zarach, and therefore I translate it that way, right? But but shine forth from Har Paran approached from Revivot Kodesh. My translator just gave me the name of the place, whereas
We don't have it.
you have myriads of, give me your line again.
And he came from the myriads holy.
He came from the myriads holy. Okay, so let me ask all of you the following question. What does he came from the myriads holy actually mean?
Down here, the footnote says the holy angels,
Yeah,
but I don't know. This
Angelic,
means lots of people.
it's
Holy myriads.
holy myriads.
I have no
Holy
idea.
myriads, Batman.
It
Sorry.
could be any mob of anything
Okay,
that was.
what does the art scroll do with it?
Yeah, it just says, I'll read the English then.
Yes, please.
Start with, I guess, verse. This is the blessing that Moses, the man of God, bestowed upon the children of Israel before his death, period. He said, Hashem came from Sinai, having shown forth to them from Seir, having appeared from Mount Paran, and then approached with some of the holy myriads, from his right hand, he presented the fiery Torah to them.
Okay, so that's a very different
Yeah.
reading. Right? Part of it is, what's one of the enduring, Mark, I know you had a question. What's one of the enduring images of God that especially gets bounced around on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, especially on Rosh Hashanah? God is, think about the very, 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 very first word we say in Shacharit.
Melech.
Hamelech.
Yeah.
God is a king, right? With whom does the king travel?
This is entourage.
With an entourage, right? Kings do not just wander around alone. So therefore, I'm introducing the metaphor of kingship in here and going, well, since I don't know exactly what Revivot Kodesh means, Revivot can mean myriads. All right. So God, if God is coming and approaching, he's got to have an entourage. Who forms God's entourage? The angelic beings. Unless you're not a big fan of God having a retinue, because that's an overly concrete image of God. It's like, I'll take the metaphor, but I don't want to take it too far, which I think informs a little bit of some of the more modern translations, which shy away from imagery that tends to concretize God. All right, all right. And that whole fiery Torah thing is pure art scroll because it's straight out of the Midrash. All right. The rabbis are stuck with this word Eshdat, right? Which they're not completely sure how to vocalize. Right? And what does it mean? The answer is not a clue what it means. And so what the rabbis did was they said, oh, it's actually two words that got smushed together. Aish, because that's a familiar word, which means fire, and dot. No, dot is the Hebrew word for faith or religion. All right. The problem is it's a word that doesn't enter Hebrew lexicon until the period of the Persians, which means it's about, about 8 centuries too early for it to be used by the biblical author here. Right? But so God gives us this fiery, passionate faith here. right? And it sort of flows nicely from the image of this radiant, luminescent deity. You know, it captures that sense of energy. The problem is that it just is, it's a great midrash that tries to explain something that makes no sense, but it's not. Okay.
Mark had a question.
Okay, I haven't forgotten, but I just want to finish the Aish dot thing. There's a suggestion that Aish dot is actually a corrupted singular that's supposed to be Ashadot, which means slopes. Okay. God appeared from Mount Paran and approached from Revivot Kadesh, lightning flashing from his hand, or perhaps he came from the right, from the slopes of Pisgah.
Sounds like Zeus.
Yes, yeah. Trust me, Zeus, Odin, if fill in the blank. But he's what some of modern, all right. And other scholars say that the letter Dalet and the letter Resh are very, very similar in the way they're written. And if you change the Dalet to a Resh, you get Mimino Ashrat Lamo. He proceeded from the right side to where you are. Ooh, that's kind of in keeping with that whole approaching, arriving, shining forth from, right? It's God enters stage right.
And yes. As opposed to the left, because left is negative.
As opposed to left.
And then you sit to the right of a person in power.
Yes, in fact, we get that again in the blessing for Benjamin. Okay, Mark, you've been very patient, and I almost thought I might keep you long enough to forget your question. But you're muted. Mark, you're muted.
Not any longer.
Okay.
Most of the people who are speaking, other than yourself, are speaking so softly that it's almost impossible to hear the words they're saying. So if you could either repeat what people have said, or hopefully people will speak a little bit louder so we can hear what's going on over there.
Okay, I will encourage the people here to speak in full voice or fuller voice, but let me just reassure you that even though they're speaking softly, each of them is carrying a large stick.
Those I'm going to follow after you. The louder you speak, then the louder I will be.
Okay.
Okay, so hopefully going forward, we will have solved that problem somewhat. Okay. Any other? Oh, Bill.
Rabbi, do we know how many angels there were, and did they have specific duties, each angel or something?
We have no idea how many angels there actually were. Myriads upon myriads of angels. And depending on who's talking about them, determines what functions they have. So, for example, one common idea is that angels are single purpose entities, right? That apparently the Holy One was not big on recycling. So, for example, the story that we all are familiar with the three mysterious people who visit Abraham, right? And the rabbis asked the obvious question: why do you need three angelic beings? Couldn't you have just sent one guy to do the job, right? Tell Abraham and Sarah that they're going to have a kid, go to Sodom and Gomorrah, rescue Lot, and then destroy the city. No, apparently multitasking is not something that angels can do. So one was sent to tell Abraham and Sarah about the good news that they're going to have a kid. And that's why in the transition, they all leave, but only two of them show up in Sodom where Lot is, because the third one has finished his purposefulness and therefore goes back to heaven. But I still need the other two, one to save Lot and the other to destroy the city. So you get this model of angelic beings created to fulfill specific tasks and purposes. On the other hand, there are other times when you get this whole kind of hierarchical model of the angelic world, where you have not just angels, but you have archangels. You know, the ones who are standing, quote unquote, in close or flying in closest proximity to God. Well, why do I need archangels if angels only exist as one-offs? And what do they do once they're finished doing their one thing? It seems like a very inefficient model. Or do they just come into being at the moment that God needs a task done? You know, there are angels that are tasked with opening the heavens to allow rain to fall and then closing them back up, and they open the portals in the morning for the sun to come out, and then they shut the portal on the other end of the circuit so as to create night. Right? Is that a permanent job? You know, after all, it's the same thing. You open it, you let the sun out in the morning. All right, you open it, you let the moon out at night.
Sounds like a song.
Well, I'm not going to sing
It
it.
sounds like a song.
It sounds like a song. I'm still not going to sing it.
The moon in the morning and the moon at night. Thank you,
Sun in the
Ethel.
morning.
Thank you, Ethel Merman.
Okay.
I now got the whole song in my head.
So like that.
It's okay. We've also got the whole world in our hands.
Oh,
That's another one.
All right. So I just want you to appreciate that how each translator went about explaining this is a product of their own biases and the fact that the words themselves in the Hebrew are not pristine and clear. You know, you don't get this kind of variability when they're talking about, and you will take a pristine and pure ram to offer as a sacrifice, and along with it, you'll bring a tenth of the finest flour, a tenth of a measure of the finest flour, and a quarter of a measure of oil. Right? That's easy stuff to translate because it's very, very, very easily understood and clear. The minute you get into fuzzy territory, it gets harder. And by the way, poetry is probably the hardest, right? Because it's by definition filled with words that are evocative. You know, I remember once doing a class in prophets and trying to explain to the class how all of this sort of works and how, what do you mean we don't know what exactly? And so I said, okay, we're going to do a little exercise. I gave him a poem. And I said, okay, what does a poem mean? And it didn't matter what any kid said. To everything that they said, I said, wrong. All right, this goes on for 5 or 6 minutes, and the class is just getting angry. Just ornery and angry until one kid says, "How do you know what the guy meant?" I'm going like, "I wrote it." So I know exactly what I meant. And guys, you were brilliantly creative, but not what the author had in mind, which is a reality that once you write something and put it out there, you're leaving it to the interpretive capacity of the reader, and the more poetic or image filled the text, the more open it is for the reader to bring their own sensitivities to the whole thing. You know, I was talking to someone earlier this morning, and they were the context is not that important, but it lent itself. I said, okay, this is not exactly like Nixon going to China. Right? Nixon going to China was a big deal. It was an overture. Da, 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 da. Okay, I realized 2 seconds after I said it that the person had no clue what I was talking about or why it was a big deal. Right? It's like I realized, of course, it doesn't resonate for this guy. He wasn't alive when Nixon went to China, and even if he studied it as a matter of history when he was in high school, it didn't. Right? So it's you bring your own stuff. Okay.
Rabbi, can I just,
Yes,
real
please.
quick, Seir and Paran, I mean, there's a little explanation here as to why that is, but wasn't there a midrash that said that, that the Holy One wanted to give the Torah to the descendants of Esau, or the
God goes around the ancient Near East hawking the Torah to people,
So
and nobody wants it.
so that's the way they would have explained why is I mean, is it why Seir and Paran?
Because they're nearby to where the Israelites are at this moment in Moab.
All right, and in the Torah,
And the Israelites have been in Paran and in Seir in their wanderings. Right? So
I get your point about it, because the commentator here is saying that it records, as the Midrash records, that God had offered the Torah to descendants of Esau who dwelled in Seir.
yeah,
And
except
to the Ishmaelites.
yeah, except that is absolutely not what Moses had in mind.
So that's
Right? Moses knows nothing about that midrash.
That midrash was way.
Is like,
Yeah.
Moses is in 1200, is writing this is around 1200, and that midrash is created more than 1,000 years later. Right? The midrash attempts to explain stuff that it is bothered by, that the author of the midrash is confused about, not because sometimes the author of the midrash thinks that what he's saying is an explanation of exactly what the Torah means, or whatever part of the Bible he's talking about. At other times, I'm bothered by this, and therefore I need to explain why this is the way it is. And it's usually as a way of introducing God into the process. Right? Classic example in the story of Esther, right? Everybody knows that Vashti refuses to appear before the king in her birthday suit, or something similar that the king has in mind. Right? Why?
Because he's drunk and partying and she's got self-pride.
Okay, that's a very
That was
21st
good.
century
Oh, I
answer.
like that.
All right, so Celia's comment was the reason Esther doesn't want to appear is that Achashverosh is a drunken boor, and she has too much pride to divest of herself of her finery in order to entertain him and his fellow drunks.
I am woman, here I stand.
Okay, this is not a Helen Reddy moment.
Well, maybe she wasn't looking her best or feeling her best or on the menses.
Okay, now you're getting closer to it, except the Midrash says, no, in order to have her run afoul of the king, God afflicts her with a horrible skin disease and rash. She's got boils and whatever. And she's going like, I am just not appearing in this condition, which then triggers the process by which she is deposed of her kingship and the king goes in search of someone else that happens to turn into Esther, because I need Esther to be the queen in order for the rest of the story to work, except who is conspicuously absent in the entire book of Esther? God. So along comes the Midrash to say, yeah, God's operating in the shadows.
Puppeteer.
Right? He's the master planner, right? Yeah, it's not just she got a feminist moment. Right? So that's what Midrash does. So here too, this is more about God. And to some degree, it's about discovering what the text might mean. Right? Okay, so let's look at verse 3. Lover indeed of the people, they're hallowed, are all in your hand. They follow in your steps, accepting your pronouncements. Okay.
Mine's way different.
Okay, big voice.
Yes, he loveth the peoples, all his holy ones, they are in thy hand. And they sit at thy feet, receiving of thy words.
Okay.
Well, you've switched
You also got the thy in there, so
the thy in there, you've
that's
switched
like King
it.
James.
Yeah, and his holy ones are in his hands, but then they sit at the feet. And you think when you're looking at this, it's the holy ones are in his hand and at his feet. But when you look at the footnote, it's
So
like-
ignore the footnote.
it gets even more convoluted.
Yes, and you know why? Because the Hebrew is unclear. All right. And by the way, his holy ones, his peoples are in his hands. That's a plural, which is a very good translation of the Hebrew, by the way. The Hebrew has a meme plural, but isn't this about the Israelites?
Yeah,
So
But it could be-
why is it in the plural?
because the Egyptians were his children.
Yeah, but why do I care? This is about Moses talking to the
The
Israelites,
tribes.
the tribes, maybe. It's one of those where it's a little, again, fuzzy. Right? So the JPS translation went with lover indeed of the people. All right, and it took the plural as a collective. Right? And it doesn't want you to be confused about, oh, he's embracing everybody. It's not universal. Right? And by the way, are the holy ones the people of Israel? Or the angelic beings that were with God at the end of the previous sentence?
Mine makes it an aside, they are in thy hand.
They are in thy hand. Yes, I'm gonna push the translation around because I'm not sure what exactly, right? And the Hebrew word tuku, I got followed in your steps. What do you have over there, Sam?
Which,
The second part of verse 3.
okay, it says,
No, sorry.
I'll read
Well,
the whole
that
thing. It
was
says,
somebody.
indeed, you love the tribes greatly. All
Ah,
its
the
holy
tribes,
ones."
all right. Amim doesn't mean tribes. Shvat. We have many Hebrew words that mean tribes. Amim is not one of them.
Okay.
Okay.
all its holy ones were in your hands, capitalize your, for they planted themselves at your feet, bearing the, in
Okay, so
parentheses,
stop there for a second.
Okay.
They planted themselves at your feet, all right? So
Mhm.
again, that you had them as
Sitting.
sitting at God's feet, all right? What's the image?
Supplication.
Partly, potentially, what else? What other image?
closeness.
Adoration.
Maybe. We got closeness, we got adoration, we got supplication.
I think of a child sitting on, little child at their parent or their teacher's feet.
Brava. Parent or child with the parent or teacher with the children at their feet. This is a God teaching moment. So there's, right? But I've got, all right, they followed in your steps, capital Y for your. They follow in God's steps, accepting your pronouncements. Okay? That's a very different set. They're not just sitting passively as learners. They're actively taking the Torah that God is bringing them, and they're walking the path that God wants. So why do some of the translations have walking or following, and why do some of them have sitting? Because the Hebrew word tuku is an unknown. So I can't write, oh, unknown. I don't know what this means. I'm the translator. I'm supposed to tell you what it means.
Why wouldn't they know what the word means?
Because it appears only once in the entirety of the Bible.
Good answer.
But, all right. And sometimes we can find cognates in other Semitic languages, which give us a clue as to what happens. And that's part of what happens between, let's say, the old JPS and the new JPS, where the ancient world and its languages are opened up more thanks to biblical scholarship and archaeology, which is unearthing stuff. And so, oh, okay, I get it now. By the way, that whole formula, bearing your pronouncements, uttering your pronouncements, are all variants of a formula in which one says that to one's king or one's suzerain, I am attentive to your commandments. As a loyal vassal of the king, I am attentive. Oh, that's this. We are following in your steps. We are loyal to your teachings. We're doing what you want of us because we are good and faithful servants of the Holy One. Yeah, Arnie.
When a word appears only once in all of Torah, which
Yes.
is the answer you gave me, I'm assuming, but I'm not, it's not smart, that the rabbis stopped and asked themselves the question, why was this word used only once in all of Torah, and why is it there?
My guess is if I was going to go back 2 millennia to try to sit in the academies of the ancient rabbis, if I was, and I might even say this as a modern biblical scholar too, which is, it might not have been as uncommon a word when it was used in the Bible.
Oh, okay.
No, like, as I said, biblical poetry represents an oldest layer of biblical material, which means that by the time it's incorporated here into the Torah as we inherit it, it's a little archaic. The further away you get, the more you lose what it might mean.
Okay.
In the same way that even in English, we have words that had various meanings, some of which kind of fall by the way as we go forward in time. Or we have words that we use that we don't even realize have roots that might suggest something different. So as we go on in the poem, I will just note for you that there are a bunch of terms that refer to both a deity in the ancient Near East and the phenomenon which that deity was thought to control. Okay, so just to give you a couple of examples, you have the term Dagan, which is reference to grain. Here in the Bible, it's you should be blessed with grain, and Tirosh, wine, Sheger refers to calving.
What does that mean?
Calves, calves.
Oh, calves. I
Calves.
thought it was like cow.
Okay, lambs. All right, all of these terms are the names of Semitic deities who were thought to be the ones who blessed the grain and the wine and the da 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 da. But our Israelite ancestors probably didn't realize that the term that they were using had its roots in that pagan world. It was sort of disconnected in the same way that we have certain words that we don't necessarily think about or even know the roots of. So for example, this morning for breakfast, I happened to have a bowl of cereal. The word cereal, which we use routinely in English, is related to the name of the Greek goddess Ceres, who was the one in charge of the kinds of cereals that you would eat, right? We have, when it rains, we have thunder sometimes. Thor, absolutely. The Norse god of thunder. Thor, thunder, right? The name of the deity and the thing that they control are alliterative and very much similar to each other, even if we never think about it, even if we didn't know it. So that phenomenon existed in the ancient world as well, where the names of things were often a byproduct or related to how we thought of or the deity to which they were attributed. In the Torah, they're just kind of imported as nouns referring to the thing. Okay? The Torah doesn't care about Dagan and Tirosh as deities. Ashtaroth, Astarte, nah, not interested, thank you. We just use the terminology, even though we don't care about the antecedent. Okay, but the original word was meant to connect you back to that deity. Okay, that's it, folks. Our time is up. Okay, for those of you who joined late, by popular request and limited consensus, we are going to continue our studies after Yom Kippur with Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our ancestors. All right, so stay tuned for more details about how that's going to work.
A question. If I'm looking at the Gettysburg Address by Lincoln, I'm looking to see how accurate it is. And so I don't want some poetic license along the way. In the speech by Patrick Henry, "Give me liberty, give me death." The problem with that is they think that the author of that particular section just decided to put that in there, and there's no other, because there's no reference to it. I want to do a Fulbright scholarship on that, and I didn't get accepted for it. So tell me here, the problem is, and you've done this before because we had a Friday night or Saturday, where you gave out a slip about how this particular one line was translated by the various books, which I really thought was interesting. When you are studying, how do you then determine the accuracy of the translation given to you, as opposed to you're looking at it and say, hey, this is a better way of translating it?
Well, I have. It's kind of a chutzpah in some ways,
That's
but
okay.
I have the advantage of relative fluency in Hebrew. So I can sort of look at the English and say, that feels odd, or I appreciate what the translator was doing and why the translator did it, but I don't, when I'm reading the English, always assume that the translation is pristine and accurate to the Hebrew.
Okay.
It also depends on the context in which I'm studying. For example, let's say I'm reading, let's say we did chapter 34, which I actually thought about doing so we could do the last chapter of the Torah together. But I just kind of like the idea of starting at the beginning of the parsha and all of the richness that is there. It's more of a narrative. And so I may not feel as bothered by any translation dissonances because, you know, when the Torah describes Moshe as not having lost any of his vigor and strength, okay? Now, I bet if we looked, some translators would have gone with vigor and strength. Some would have used other terms that evoke the same sense. I think there's one translation that uses potency,
Okay.
power. You know, there are any number of terms that you could use
Synonyms.
as synonyms for the same thing. And I may not be bothered because the idea is that his vitality was undiminished. Okay, another way of phrasing the same thing. It's only if I'm really trying to get the best translation or the best understanding of the terms that I would bother to compare and say, oh, what are those words best translate as opposed to it's giving me a very powerful image of Moses unaffected by the ravages of age.
I appreciate your answer, and I want to come back for a moment. Hopefully everybody doesn't mind. Torah doesn't have vowels. And so therefore, lots of time you, along with other rabbis, have said, this could be translated the following way, depending upon if the vowel was this and the vowel was that. So yes, with Hebrew, so tell me in the translation, you have a problem at times because the vowels aren't there. Therefore, you got to figure out what the word is in the first place.
That is true. However, there are rules for biblical grammar that you can't wish away just because you may not like the outcome of the translation.
Okay.
All right. Or to use one of the examples that I shared on the first night of Rosh Hashanah, we use the word hodu a lot in the prayer book. It's very often when we're quoting the book of Psalms. All right, it means praise God, if you want, glorify God, acclaim God. You choose your English term as you see fit, right? But when the sentence is hodu l'Adonai ki tov, hodu has to be a verb. Okay, I can't not. You need a verb in the sentence.
Okay.
Right. When we say when we're going to put the Torah back at the end of in the Torah service, that the first part of the response to the opening line by the person who's doing the Torah service, the first word is hodo al eretz v'shamayim. Right. My point in raising it on Wednesday evening was that people, because we say hodu almost all the time and hodo only here, people say hodu. The problem is that in that place, in that sentence, you need a noun,
Okay,
okay? Hodo means God's glory. Or if you want his glory, but, okay, but that's what, it's hod is the primary, and hodo means his, which in this case means God's glory. God's glory envelops, embraces, shines over the, however you want to translate the next part, I don't care.
okay,
But I need a noun right there,
okay.
right? The problem is when you say hodu as the first word of that sentence, hodu exists in modern Hebrew as a noun. It means turkey, as in gobble gobble. All right, that's a very different image. All right, God's glory embraces, towers over, envelops the earth, or hodu. There's a giant turkey sitting on the globe, on the world. All right, very different image.
Thank you, Rabbi. I appreciate that.